Open Tobias Harris, and Tobias drills it! Sixers up one!
Embiid fakes, Embiid down the lane!
What is going on, guys? I am back after a frustrating back-to-back loss for the Philadelphia 76ers. No James Brain with me tonight, but I did want to hop on here, vent a little bit, and give you guys some content to talk a little bit about this Sixers stretch. Again, I get it. They're shorthanded. I get it, the injuries, but I'm quite frustrated after the past two games. So I want to get into a couple different things during this video. Feel free to chime in on the comments. I'm live on Twitter right now. For any of you guys that want to get in the mix, feel free to drop anything that you guys want to talk about, and it will be available to be watched back on YouTube as well. But as far as the overarching points that I do want to get into today, number one, the Sixers kind of outlook for the season, the standings, their playoff seeding that is up for grabs at this point, because it has hit a significant little, pessimistic swing over these past couple games. So I want to dive into that specifically, talk some Tobias Harris and what we can do about the Tobias Harris situation, which I think you could argue has hit an all-time low point in a Sixers uniform, as well as discuss a little Kelly Oubre, some of the injuries as a whole, and some takeaways from the past two games. So let's begin by jumping right into things, and I want to pull up the box score for last night and take a little bit of look at that. So we do know that they did lose to the Memphis Grizzlies 115-109 last night. This coming the second night of a back-to-back, with the first game coming loss to the Brooklyn Nets. Two bad losses for the Sixers team. And I think that it speaks especially full because of the timing of things. That we know we're in the second half of the season. You have to take every win that you can get, especially with no Joel Embiid on the table. And these were two primetime opportunities to get a win that the Sixers found a way to blow in both situations. That in this matchup last night against the Grizzlies, holding a 15-point lead in the second half and still not being able to find a way to win, being outscored 34-16 in the fourth quarter. And let's talk about the biggest reasons why. Number one, front and center, it is Tobias Harris. That I hate to be the guy piling on, ripping him, but it is impossible not to. It feels like the highs and lows of Tobias Harris have been even more significant this year, and it's been very clear that the lows are more frequent than the highs. Looking at last night's performance, Tobias Harris, in 35 minutes of play, the most of any Sixers player, finished with 8 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 block, 1 turnover, shot just 3 for 12 from the field, 1 for 4 from 3. Straight up unacceptable. And my biggest reason for why it is unacceptable, he led the team in minutes with 35, and he was 5th on the team in shots. There's a lack of aggression that was there. There's a lack of ability to blow by opponents, which was there. And the defense and decision-making was overall horrible. But the biggest thing that I want to harp on with Tobias Harris, I get it. The expectations, we know who he is at this point in time. But what stood out to me last night and lately in Tobias's game, which has gotten worse in my mind, is the decision-making. That so many times last night, he was caught in transition. He was telegraphing what he was going to do, and the Sixers ultimately suffered as a result. That between that being blown by on so many defensive opportunities, I mean, he made Santi Aldama look like he was Ja Morant, the way that he was blowing past him with these simple moves. That is the stuff that can't happen. The rotation stuff on defense, the decision-making with the ball, those are complaints that we cannot afford to have about Tobias Harris. I will live with the missed jumpers. I will live with the nights when you have it going, the nights when you don't. But those little things, the not knowing what you're going to do with the ball, the telegraphing the pass that you're about to make, that stuff just straight up can't happen. And the lack of really just aggression on offense, of trying to create your own shot, to try to be the driving force. We're talking about Tobias Harris, the $40 million man, sharing the floor with basically G Leaguers, two-way guys, and a bunch of guys scrapping for their NBA careers. And he just didn't stand out. In fact, you could make the argument he stood out in the negative way, that he just was not a guy that looked like one of the better players on the court. And that is really indicative of who Tobias Harris is at this point. I do want to look at the couple different box score before I circle back to this. Cam Payne, some solid minutes that in his 28 minutes of play, 16 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, shot just 6 of 17 from the field and 2 of 6 from 3. But overall, I thought he was okay. He was a team low, minus 18. Buddy Hield added 15 points with 5 rebounds, 3 assists, also had 3 steals and a block. Hield shot 3 of 7 from 3, which is really the stuff that matters with him, including one big-time 3 to give the Sixers a fighting chance at the end. He also was just 6 of 17 from the field. He struggled greatly to finish around the rim last night. And that's one of the things that I think I'm having a little bit of concern with Buddy is, for starters, everything feels a little slower than I expected with him. Just the rate that he gets off shots, the rates that he makes his decisions, everything that he does feels a tad slower than I expected in his game. Now, it's obviously we cannot judge him until Joel Embiid returns to the floor. That is the deciding factor. That is the reason why Buddy Hield is here. We've talked for years why Buddy Hield will be a perfect match next to Joel Embiid, and I still feel that to be the case. So we can't really judge that he's struggling without the gravity that Joel Embiid is. Joel is the sun that the Sixers revolve around, Buddy Hield being a planet to revolve around Joel in this comparison here. And I do think he'll be very effective in this role. But I've talked a lot about, we've seen the success with JJ Redick, with Seth Curry. And I do think Buddy Hield is a more complete basketball player than either of the first two that I mentioned. But right now it is a little rough that he is struggling to find places to get off his own shot. Frankly, I think he should be touching double-digit three-point attempts on a night-to-night basis. And while 3 for 7 is fine from an efficiency standpoint, I would like to see more volume there. That there's just not many more efficient ways to score for this current team. They are starved for offensive production. So I think there should be more pin downs, more of a focus to get Buddy absolutely slinging shots off. A couple other guys that I want to point to. Kelly Oubre, 34 minutes, 25 points, 4 rebounds, 2 of them on the offensive, 2 of them on the defensive. 1 assist, 2 steals, 1 block. He did have 5 turnovers and shot 7 of 21 from the field, but I thought Kelly was excellent last night. And I know the box score isn't perfect for him. You always have to take the bad with the good with Kelly Oubre. That's just the unfortunate reality of it, is he is who he is. You're going to have to roll with the punches when things aren't there, and you see the bad version of Kelly in stints. But I thought he was excellent last night. And the biggest change within his game of late that I've noticed with Kelly Oubre is he's making more of concrete decisions to get downhill, that he's attacking the rim in a way that really very few Sixers have, and it just is incredibly efficient offense. That for Kelly Oubre specifically, it feels like there's something that clicked in his head, that there is this thought process of realizing, I'm the most athletic and biggest human being on the court right now. Maybe not biggest, but you know what I mean? With a splash of athleticism, the rate that he can explode past guys, and that's really where his offense is generated from. That he's the 4th best scorer, or by percentage, when driving to the basket. And shout out to Mr. Crockpot tuning in saying, which contract is worse, Tobias or Bradbury? It's got to be Tobias, man. Like with Bradbury, there's at least a circumstance which you can squint on it, think about maybe he can be a safety, and there is the dead cap, obviously some different financial standards between the NBA and NFL. But I do think Bradbury, there's kind of a more of a baseline of what you're getting from him. For Tobias, what I think has gotten especially bad this year is just how variable his play is. That there has always been the highs and the lows of Tobias, but it feels like the lows this year are significantly steeper in a way that the team can't win. It almost feels like I'm having a little bit of the James Harden debate again. That with James Harden, when he was playing at his peak, you couldn't have any complaints about it, that you saw it. But when he was playing at his worst, you straight up can't win basketball games with him on the floor. That's the mold that Tobias is kind of sneaking in, that we have seen the excellent versions of Tobias. We've seen him delivering, having these 30-plus point games, more so than what I've thought or remembered him to have on the season. But then there are the valleys and the lack of frustration. And again, the number one thing that I am going to harp on and complain, it is the decision-making. That this has never been an issue with Tobias Harris. There never has been the frustration. In general, he's been a very good transition player. But I see regression in the way that he's telegraphing passes when he's trying to kick to the corner. His rotations on defense are horrible. Santi Aldama was just blowing by him last night, which just straight up can't happen. So very frustrating there. And I did think it was interesting to swing it back to Kelly Oubre, that when you look at the final play of that game, that was a play drawn up for Kelly Oubre to get downhill and attack the basket. Now, in the context of things, the Sixers needing 4 points at that point in time, Buddy Hield had just hit a big-time 3 to give them a fighting chance in this game. I like the inbounds play by Nick Nurse. Got an inbounds pass, got Kelly Oubre all the way in the backcourt, a handoff, and then him getting downhill. Ultimately was blocked at the rim on a clean block. Initially was called a foul and then reversed after review. I like the play. You're not going to get it every time, but I did like it overall. But it is indicative of Tobias Harris, that with you on the floor, there's the final play being drawn up for Kelly Oubre. Mr. Crockpot chiming back in saying, it's legit hard to take this Sixers team seriously with the way Tobias is being handled. Hashtag Philly wants Council the fourth. I love that. I'm with you on the Ricky Council stuff. I also do want to talk a little bit about Jeff Doughton. Mr. Crockpot also chiming in. Also, make sure you guys are always checking out the Edge of Philly sports stuff. Do a ton of post game work with those stuff and all the with those guys, and everybody's great over there. So make sure you're checking in on that as well. Mr. Crockpot saying, at what point will the Sixers franchise finally take accountability seriously? That is the tough things, that we do know the politics of the NBA, the different standards that come with the different numbers that are attached for the name. Not fair, but it is the world we live in. And with Tobias Harris, I think the bigger issue, and I'm with you, that I would try Ricky Council IV. I would try these things, but there's really not these glowing options for who's better than him, that when you're looking down the list of available options, they're so shorthanded and so depleted that it just feels like not the time to dig into it. And the bottom line, that what you're kind of battling is, what you really want is a serviceable playoff player, that you want Tobias Harris to at least be capable come postseason time. So is it more harmful to bench him now when you don't really have those alternatives to step up, versus kind of sacrificing what from a mental standpoint that does to him? I don't fully know the way Tobias Harris is wired, but I do know he's been the certified dead set starter for the entirety of his Sixers tenure. So if that has been the case, to interrupt that, and then H checking in kind of on the same page saying, I hear you, Crockpot, but we don't have better options at power forward, especially with Morris gone. I am kind of with you there. And the other point that I will bring up, seeing too much Nico Batum, and that's especially repetitive when there is Tobias Harris and Nico Batum sharing the floor here. To bring it up, last night for Batum, playing 30 minutes of action, that is just too much for Batum without Joel Embiid on the floor. He finished with 10 points, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, 1 block. He did have a turnover, shot 3 of 6 from the field and 1 of 2 from 3. He did have an impressive putback dunk, one that I wasn't sure that he fully had in his bag at this point in his career, but I was impressed by that from Batum. But when I speak about him as a player, I'll start off with, I love Nico Batum. I'm a huge fan of what he brings to this team, but I'm a huge fan of what he brings to this team when Joel Embiid is on the floor with him. Without him, you see the limitations in his game. You see the way where this guy is not quite the NBA starting caliber player that he's looked for stretches. That when you break down his skill set, the things that he is good at, it's perfect things to surround Joel Embiid with. That he's a quick decision maker. He's an excellent entry pass maker. He's got a great catch and shoot instinct, and incredibly quick release, and efficient numbers when knocking them down. But when you take Joel Embiid off the floor, there's not a lot that Batum does. That he's fine defensively. He can hang. He's even been playing some small ball center for this team. He's still a guy that can be a connective passer, play make a little. They're still running a ton of plays through him. That's something I've noticed throughout this entire season since Batum's got here, is a ton of the Nick Nurse play designs are all with Batum being the primary decision maker. And he is a guy who can thread the needle and make some tougher passes than I ever realized was the case. So I do like the way that things are funneling out, but I do think it's a little bit strange that Batum, even when the Sixers team is fully healthy and constructed, is a lot of times the guy pulling the strings and making those decisions. There even was the game, I think it was like a week and a half ago at this point, where Batum had not played all game and only subbed in to make the one entry pass with the game kind of on the line, that following immediately Tobias Harris turning over the inbounds pass prior. So there was good reason for it, but that does speak to what he has thought of from just a decision-making process. And I'm absolutely with it. But I'm also think with Nico Batum, he's a guy that's also here for the playoffs. And he's a guy that you need to make sure you're not running up the miles on his body for no reason. That I'm cool with him playing every other game in the same way they're kind of handling with Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry obviously sitting out last night. I've been pretty happy with what Kyle Lowry has brought to this team in a way that I'm surprised. That I have pounded the table and been pretty pro Pat Beverly. I still feel that way from a standpoint of I would like to have him on this roster come playoff time. And frankly, he's been balling with the Bucks since he got there. So shout out to Pat for being able to chase his ring in a new location. But Kyle Lowry looks to have more left in the tank than I gave him credit for. And my concern in my debate here was never saying that Patrick Beverly is a better basketball player than Kyle Lowry or at the peak in their career. My debate has always been, I just was not confident in how much Kyle Lowry has left to bring to the table. That guys fall off quick at times, and my concern was Lowry would be heading down that path. But during his time with the Sixers, he's been excellent. And the thing that has stood out and really been noticeable to me is just what an adult on the floor that he feels like. He's a smart decision maker, a guy that can run the offense. Mr. Crockbot checking back in saying Lowry has been awesome, and he opens up Maxey so much more on the court. Absolutely agree there. And I'm starting to talk myself into Kyle Lowry being a starting player on this team. I do think there's a world where you allow Kyle Lowry to be a true point guard in a way that the Sixers really haven't had. I guess James Harden, you can kind of point it, but Harden's the guy that was out there to get his own buckets as well, that he was the secondary option behind Joel Embiid from a scoring standpoint, that Maxey kind of following line in third is the tertiary option there. With Kyle Lowry, he's a pure point guard, that he's there to run the offense. He's a guy that sure will hit his open shots when they're there, but he's going to be very much focused on setting up Joel Embiid, setting up Tyrese Maxey, creating the best possible shot on a possession by possession standpoint for this Sixers team. And that is really appealing to me. And what makes it especially likely in my mind is the recent news with DeAnthony Melton. It's not good, man. That now 2 weeks until they're going to reevaluate him. No real outlook for what the timeline is for him possibly coming back. And back injuries are not a good sign. That with Melton specifically, he's dealt with this through his entire career. I was reading a couple articles today. Back in 2018, 2019, with the Grizzlies, he started dealing with these back issues, and they've carried with him since. That since he's gotten to the Sixers, there's been multiple different back issues that he has dealt with. And while the Sixers can say they're not connected and they're independent and all these things, a back injury is still a back injury. And that so much in there impacts each other. And this specific issue that he's being listed at is something that has to do a little bit with the nerves in the back as well, which makes me super nervous. So I obviously hope that he's okay and can return to the floor, but my level of optimism for that has shrunk quite a bit. And frankly, I think this is my greater concern is I think this could be a long-term issue for DeAnthony Melton, that this was a guy I was ready to hitch it to. Let's give him a multi-year deal. Let's give him a 4-year contract. I want him to be a part of this Sixers team for the long haul, but then you bring in these injury concerns, and it's especially frustrating for Melton as he is on a contract year, going to be a free agent, and this absolutely is going to cost him a decent bit of money. I hope that he's okay and able to return to the floor for this season at some point, but I don't think that's a guarantee in the way that I think it has kind of been portrayed to be. So if that is the case, you got to find someone else to slide into the starting lineup, and then the conversation becomes, is it Kyle Lowry? Is it a guy like Buddy Hield? That's, I guess, the debate there. And when kind of looking at my dream playoff lineup for the Sixers team, obviously Tyrese Maxey once he returns from the point guard. Number 2, I guess the conversation's really between DeAnthony Melton and Buddy Hield, assuming that Melton's there. So I guess it really becomes between Lowry and Buddy Hield if Melton is not. Then you got Tobias, Batum, and Embiid. Again, I am going to be a Nico Batum truther, that I do believe that at his best, he is a guy that can contribute to this team, and he just looks like a night and day different player when Joel Embiid is there. So I do think with Joel Embiid returning to the floor, you do ride with Nico Batum in the starting lineup. Gives you a little additional size as well, but we will see how the injuries stand out on that point of things. I do want to shift gears a little bit here and jump into a little bit of the playoff seeding, as this is a part of my frustration in the overall the slippage and the losses the past 2 games. So I do have these standings pulled up here. No surprises at the top, things seeming to fall a little bit how they were expected. The Boston Celtics leading the pack with a 48-13 record. They're set to square off with the Denver Nuggets tonight at the point of recording this. So that will be a fun matchup to watch, a potential NBA Finals preview there. I'm not going to say much about the Celtics at this point. It's tough to, be climbing in with some ammo as the Sixers are playing as they are. But I will say that there is a part of me that isn't as bought in as this team as I think a lot of people are. Tough to argue with the results, and they're just winning on a night-to-night basis at a rate that you can't dispute whatsoever. But I do think they're a little too jump shot heavy, a little too three-point reliant. And when we bring in the injury conversations, they've been a really healthy team this year. And obviously, you hope that lasts for the season, that continues. But it feels like a ton of teams around the NBA, Sixers included, have been dealt a poor injury hand. The Celtics have not been a team that have had to deal with those types of hurdles. So we'll see how that shakes out. They're definitely running away with the Eastern Conference with an 8-game lead for the first place. Below them, the Milwaukee Bucks with a 41-22 record. They did get stomped by the Warriors last night in a game which was pretty impressive performance by the Warriors, and I think a bit of a statement win for them. But Milwaukee's starting to play some really good basketball. That they are a deep and talented team with Giannis. Dame starting to look like more of himself. I am beginning to inch them closer to the real deal contenders in a way that I've been skeptical because of their defensive issues throughout the season. Number 3, the Cleveland Cavs with a 40-22 record. The Cavs are my number 1 fraud team that I'll bring up right here, that I just don't think they are serious playoff contenders. It still sticks with me the way that the Knicks absolutely bullied them in last year's playoffs. And frankly, I don't think they got that much better since that point. They did add a couple things. Dean Wade, by the way, has been on a heater and playing incredibly well over the past couple games. But when you talk about a playoff standpoint, I just don't think there's enough there. I'm not an Evan Mobley guy. Jared Allen's fine, but he's also limited. We know what Donovan Mitchell can do. And by the way, Darius Garland, who's a guy that I've stuck up for and been a huge fan of, not been playing too hot this year. That he does look like he's regressed a little bit and isn't quite the same dangerous player he once was. To jump below that, the Orlando Magic have not got as much attention as I think they deserve this year. 37-26 on the year. Paolo Banchero looking like that certified number 1 option, the reason that he was the number 1 overall pick. They are a team that is good. They're talented. They've won 5 in a row. but I also think the parts don't quite fit together in the way that is necessary from a playoff standpoint. That I do think that they have some roster construction issues to deal with. This is obviously going to be put off till the offseason, but I think it's time to start making that sacrifice of figuring out which players are true parts of your long-term future, shifting the rest, getting shooters to surround these guys with, finding the right veterans to make this team mesh. I don't think that all happens this year. So we'll see what happens with the Orlando Magic. They are a fun to watch team. And again, I think they deserve more praise than they have gotten nationally, but I don't think they're a team that strikes fear into me from the playoff standpoint. The New York Knicks, I like quite a bit at 36-25, but the injury bug has bit them pretty harshly as well. Jalen Brunson dealing with a couple things. We've seen OG Anunoby and Julius Randle out for an extended period of time. Mitchell Robinson dealing with some injury issues this year. So they have not had their full force team for really since before the All-Star break at this point. If they get fully healthy, I absolutely think they're dangerous. And the way that I've described the Knicks throughout the season is as a high floor team, that you know what you're getting from them. You're not going to have these disappointing performances or blowout in the way that I really think you can from any of the other teams in there. The Bucks, the Cavs, the Sixers, certainly the Magic, I would include in there. You're not going to have that type of performance where they don't show up with the New York Knicks. So I do give them a high floor and a fighting chance because of that, and just their defensive nature, the physicality, Tom Thibodeau, them having all the pieces. I am a Knicks believer in that 5 seed, but we'll see how the cards fell and really how much injuries play a part with all that. Number 6, the Miami Heat, 35-26. The Heat are cooking at the right time, and I will admit that I'm beginning to be afraid of Miami. That playoff Jimmy, we know how things go. We know how that process is, how dangerous he can be. And really, when you think back to the way that he performed in last year's playoffs, you can make an argument that was some of the most impressive individual basketball I've watched from any player. That first round specifically against the Milwaukee Bucks, you could pull out prime Michael Jordan, and Jimmy Butler would have given him the work in that matchup. So I do got to tip the cap there. And looking beyond that, I mean, Jaime Jaquez is a real deal contributor ready for these playoffs. Terry Rozier is going to make an impact on that team. They still have guys like Tyler Hero there. Bam Adebayo has taken a next step this season, I believe, from his availability. We know what he does on the defensive side of things, and he has brought more from a shooting standpoint, the things that he provides on the offense. And Duncan Robinson, by the way, has continued to get better, continued to add layers to his basketball abilities. With the dribbling package, he's creating way more off the dribble this season than I've ever seen from him before. That typically he's been just this catch and shoot guy that's running off motion, running off pin downs, and just shooting threes the second it touches his hand. This year, he's kind of changing the picture for the team a little bit, attacking the rim, kicking out of others, all these things. I've been really impressed with the continued layers that Duncan Robinson has added to his game, and pretty cool that he is elevated to the level that he currently is. Looking right below this, we do have the Philadelphia 76ers with a record of 35-27. They're 13 and a half games back from the top seed. Talked plenty about them. And number 8, we have the Indiana Pacers, 35-28, just a half game back. And that's really the point that I wanted to bring up here, is that when you look at the current standings for the East, the 4th place team in the Orlando Magic and the 8th place team in the end of Indiana Pacers separated by just 2 games. Now, the greater overarching conversation with the Sixers team is obviously avoiding the play-in. That I've been pretty optimistic about their ability to just stay afloat enough to make sure that is the case. But after those back-to-back losses against the Nets and Grizzlies, that's out the window for me. That I think we're forced with the reality that this team might be dropping into the play-in game. And when I guess the next question that comes up is I've also had the A seed as kind of their floor as a team. Well, the Chicago Bulls starting to play some good ball down there in the 9th seed. They have a 30-32 record on the year. They are 4.5 games back behind the Pacers there. If they continue to win, and DeMar DeRozan's been terrific of late, we see what just overall the team has just been connecting better, playing well. So the Bulls have the potential to go on a bit of a run. And I do think that there's a chance that maybe 8 is not quite the floor in the way that I had it set before, and that is concerning to me. But again, I don't think this is over because of how narrow these gaps are, that there is a world where the Sixers find a way to win a couple games and overall can climb a little bit. But I'm not super optimistic about that. And I will explain why, as let's take a look at the Sixers schedule. As I've mentioned, I'm incredibly frustrated by those past 2 losses because they were ones that they just had to win. That when you map out the schedule, the expected wins and losses, those were 2 that you needed. And this is why. When looking at the next couple games for the Sixers team, this moving on, tomorrow night they'll be back in action against the New Orleans Pelicans. That's a tough game. I don't think there's much of a chance of the Sixers winning that one, to be honest. That we're talking about Zion Williamson is going to be a problem for the Sixers team. How are we matching up there? That they're already struggling with rebounds. We know the foul issues with Paul Reed. I have some real concerns. And by the way, the Pelicans have been far better than they've gotten credit for this season. They've been a really dangerous team and a team that I'm not counting out fully in the playoffs. That on the year, they're 37-25 in 5th place in the Western Conference. They got good talent with Zion, with Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum. They're a dangerous team, and they're coming into Philly tomorrow to play them. Then there is back-to-back games for the Knicks against the Knicks. The Sixers have to find a way to split at least one of those, and that's purely a standings kind of outlook. That those are big games against the New York Knicks. The Knicks are, I would consider, the second most dangerous team in the East when fully healthy. That if you can find a way to just split those games, that would be a huge deal. But based on who's on the court, I'm not really optimistic on that. That this Knicks team is going to show up. Then a matchup against the Milwaukee Bucks. I know they have flaws. I know they're not perfect. We know the Doc Rivers storyline, all those things. But as the Sixers are currently constructed, it's not great. That this is a situation in which there's just not a lot of ways to generate offense. And moving on a little bit, there is a matchup against the Charlotte Hornets. Have to win that one. That they have to find a way to win that one, because then you're off playing the Miami Heat, the Phoenix Suns, a brutal West Coast trip. Where do you go? Suns, Lakers, Clippers, Kings, who you cannot sleep on and are a very good team as well. Then it's against the Clippers again, back in Philly for this one. The Cleveland Cavaliers, who the Sixers have had their number, but they're still a talented team. And there's the Toronto Raptors, who are beatable, but once again, this is more dependent on who the Sixers have on the floor. Then the OKC Thunder, who are absolutely legit and I believe belong in that contenders championship contending category. Another matchup against the Miami Heat. And then this way to close the season, this is where there is some optimism for me. That if there is a way where Joel Embiid is back at this point, where they have a chance to get the job done and go on a winning streak to close things out, I do think it is these 5 games here. So if they can end strong and have some wiggle room to climb up at that point, there is some optimism as they close out against the Memphis Grizzlies, San Antonio Spurs, Detroit Pistons, Orlando Magic, and Brooklyn Nets. That's a very favorable end to your year, but you got to get there, and you have to have something to play for when you do get there. That is the concern. That what if you get to that point and they're already sunk? Then begins to be more of these discussions of, is it worth bringing Joel Embiid back? And for my 2 cents on that, my short answer, yes. That if the guy's healthy, if he can play, you 100% bring him back. And I do think this specific Sixers roster, all these guys are catered to play next to Joel Embiid. And that's a reason why they look so bad right now. I mentioned with Nico Batum about his skill set, but it's other guys as well. Buddy Hield, I mentioned, how his game is going to look night and day different when Joel Embiid is on the floor. And I think there's enough there that I'm seeing from this team that has at least a fighting chance, even if they're in the play-in. I'm not pounding the table and saying you need to turn in your Sixers to win the championship betting slips right now, that you need to go out there and get to whatever sports book you can. I'm not saying that, but I do think there is a fighting chance, more so than a lot of people are getting credit. And by the way, I think we're underselling just how impactful Joel Embiid is. That we're talking about this Sixers team overnight looking like one of the better teams in the East throughout the entirety of the season, to when he's not there looking like a complete bottom feeding team. And there is stuff that is going to be impactful, even if he's not at 100% version of himself. The defensive side of things, just being there as a true paint presence in a way that Paul Reed isn't quite, and Mo Bamba certainly isn't. And when you're doing the KJ Martin and Tobias Harris minutes at the 5, you're absolutely not getting any sort of rim protection or concern there. Joel Embiid's presence changes things there. On the offensive end, he's a guy that you have to worry about every single possession. It prevents you from sagging off shooters, or it prevents you from, leaving him in one-on-one coverage with your big man. It changes the picture completely, and there's other ways that you can benefit from it. That when you have a guy like Nick Nurse, I do believe in his ability to poke holes in the defensive strategy, to find ways to punish teams when they are going at Joel in the way that teams will and do frequently against him. So the seeding conversation, while it is relevant and while in an ideal world, I do hope they stay out of the play-in, the bottom line is I give this team a fighting chance regardless. It's going to be an ugly couple weeks, that there's no doubt about it, until this team gets healthier. I know we got some positive news of Robert Covington seemingly set to come back in 7 to 10 days, begin his ramp-up process, returning to the floor. I do think that's an impactful player, that is a guy that I think can provide a positive outlook in the postseason. It will arguably be the Sixers' best perimeter defender. I think I personally would make that case, that I'm a Robert Covington guy. I do think that when you think about the Jason Tatums of the world, or whoever they might be matching up with, Giannis even, that Rocco might be the best option. That a guy like Batum, I think there's a little too much on his plate. That when you got a guy like Covington, slightly younger, still moves a little better, more athleticism there, even though he's not what he once was either. So Covington, I do think, will be a guy that will create some turnovers, wreak some havoc, and knock down some three-pointers for the Sixers team. So when we're moving beyond that we know the outlook, that they need to find a way to scrape and win games. They do just need to straight up get healthy. There's not a lot beyond that this is going to be an ugly stretch of Sixers basketball. And the last guy that I did want to talk about before I wrap things up here, it is Jeff Doughton Jr. But I did think it was a bit of surprise, and I'm going to pull up this box score again here, that in last night's game, Jeff Doughton playing 24 minutes of action, in those minutes adding 10 points, 6 assists, 3 steals on the game, also had a block, shot 4 of 7 from the field and 2 of 4 from 3. That's really good production in a small amount of time. And with Doughton, I've been pretty pessimistic about him overall, that I am a guy that I'm more in on Ricky Council IV and more in on Terquavion Smith. Frankly, I would have loved to see Terquavion Smith get a little more run, especially during this period. Why not? Let's try some things. At least that's a guy that can generate offense and get some shots up. Before Jeff Doughton Jr., it's very clear there's a belief from Nick Nurse in his ability and in his game, that we know that he's gotten his most extensive NBA opportunity with the Toronto Raptors, organization, that the Sixers went and traded the rights to Mac McClung for Jeff Doughton Jr. at the start of the season. So that is another indication of what they think of him or what his potential outlook and role could be. And then he moved him up the pecking order to give an opportunity last night. That Jeff Doughton Jr. got first quarter minutes for the Sixers team, that he was in before Ricky Council IV. He was in before a lot of players that are in the regular rotation, and I do think that's telling. And you know what? Nick Nurse was right, that when looking at this production, Jeff Doughton was excellent last night, that he was really good. He was the guy that what stood out to me the most, it was his decision-making. It was a lot of what I'm kind of commenting and critiquing of Tobias Harris about telegraphing things. I saw a ton from Jeff Doughton of him just knowing what to do with the ball, that it was him having a good feel for when it's time to put it on the deck, try and create something, when it's time to be a little bit more passive, let the offense come to him, when it is time to defer to others versus get your own. There was a lot of good stuff from Jeff Doughton Jr. last night. I do think he will be a guy who continues to be in this at least mix of rotation. And I will note that in the grand scheme of things in conversation, let's not treat Jeff Doughton Jr. quite like he's a future piece, like a guy that is developing to something. He is 26 years old, so he's kind of is who he is at this point, and he's a fun little player. Played at Rhode Island. I like his game. I don't love his game in the way that I think I do with a couple other guys, which has leaked into my pessimism here. But he does fit a need for this team right now, and that's kind of the most important thing. So we'll see what the outlook is. I do expect Kyle Lowry to be back on the floor, which changes things from the Sixers' perspective. He will be the guy trusted to initiate the offense and have some success in that level, but we will see what happens. Ultimately, they got to have a better Tobias Harris game tomorrow. That there's just no chance if this guy plays the way that he's currently playing. And my goalposts have shifted, that I'm no longer critiquing Tobias Harris for his contract. I'm critiquing Tobias Harris for just being a straight up basketball player, that you could be on a veteran's minimum and I'd be mad about the way you're currently playing. We cannot have the lowest of the lows. If he was just an adequate player last night, they likely win that game. If you're just a mid-tier, fine, average player, that's fine. But you're getting blown by on the defensive end, making poor decisions on the offensive end, not making up for it from a scoring perspective. I can't take it anymore. So we cannot get that version of Tobias Harris. I'm sure he feels the heat. I read the comments and saw the videos from Nick Nurse post-game, and I think Nurse is very much feeling it as well. So we'll see how things shake out. But ultimately, they got to find a way to scrap a win somehow. I'm not overly optimistic it will be against the New Orleans Pelicans, but I appreciate all you guys for tuning into this video here. Make sure you're subscribing to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel. You guys can also catch me on Sixers Digest. Just dropped a little bit more of a deep dive on the injury report and the Jeff Doughton outlook there, so you guys can tap into that at Sixers Digest on YouTube. Also can catch me on Fox Sports The Gambler. Be on from 11 to 1, both on YouTube and on the radio on Saturday, so make sure to stay posted for that. I'll be back with you next time right here on Pick Swap Media. Peace.